So tonight is a little bit different. We have a panel of 4 individuals who are going to be talking about across the good and the bad and the ugly. It's not one's going to do the good and one's going to do, but they're going to do all 3 a little bit and talk about their experience from a story perspective. Before we go into the panel session, however, we're going to have each of them are going to come up and give a short little presentation. And so who we have here tonight, for those of you who may not know some of our panelists, is Kâren Sander. She is now with HDR, but for years she was the executive director of the Downtown Business Association, which we call Downtown Boise Association here. And we also have Hausrath with us, who is a longtime neighborhood advocate, as well as she served 8 years on city council in the 90s. So has a depth of experience. And then we have 2 individuals from different parts of the city of Boise here with us tonight. Wayne, I'm going to destroy your name, Wayne. Rysavy? Rysavy. Got close. He is the communications manager for Boise Planning Development Services, and then Josh Wilson, who's with Design Review. So we'll give you slightly different perspectives from the city because they play different roles there. So with that, I'm going to invite Kâren up and she'll get the ball rolling.
Thanks, Tiana. Welcome, everybody. How are you? So I'm going to start out a little bit on the big picture side. At HDR, we have a strategic communications group, and they do a lot with a variety of municipalities and cities with public outreach. And so they really do, I'm going to just increase the size of this so we can see it. So what I want to show you here is that there's just not one tool out there when you're working in the public, when you're working with a city or municipality or a private client that needs to get the word out there. There are multiple tools. Ann and I had this discussion, and, you know, in days past, you would put a newspaper ad out, and that was it. That was the only way you knew how to get the word out about public outreach, what was happening at the city or for a development. There are so many tools available today, and it really depends on the situation, depends on the project, it depends on a multitude of things. And so one of the things that our team is learning is that not everybody has access to all these tools. So if you don't have all the tools available, somebody's going to miss out. So it really is a menu of options. And, you know, on this slide, what it's showing is that you can use the media to get the word out. You can use social media. Social media is used a lot anymore between Facebook and Twitter and blogs and you name it. Public meetings are just one tool, and that's when people can gather, but not everybody's always available to attend a public meeting. So you've got to get people the option to do an online survey, for instance. In many instances, our teams use what they call community working groups, especially if it's a really big, large project. Bring in representatives from the community to work through the issues and so that they're at the table. Technical advisory groups, sometimes things are very complicated and you need the experts at the table to work through things. There are so many ways that you can, this thing called public outreach. So I just really wanted to show you this graphic that I think tells you how you can use a variety of things to get out the word. I like the pop-up meetings. We've used those quite a few times. We just did a big project up in Coeur d'Alene, and there's a big hospital, Kootenai Health, and we did a little pop-up meeting right in their cafeteria because you want to be where people are, and sometimes they cannot get away from work. So this is one of the things that we've used, also project tours. So with that said, Deanna gave you some of my background. For many years, I was with the Downtown Boise Association. So I'm going to share some of the stories of my experiences with public outreach and also just some of the sticky situations we were in on many occasions. So one of them that I want to share is there was a developer who had purchased the Capitol Terrace and was going to build on top of Capitol Terrace housing project, fabulous project, and this was before the downturn. And before there was any public outreach done, we landed at City Council. So by the time you get to City Council, often it's way too late. And there were so many heated conversations going on at that City Council meeting. There was a lot of finger pointing. There was a lot of misinformation by that point. At that point, Downtown Boise Association was representing not only the businesses, but also the residents, which put our organization at that point in a really precarious situation. There was a lot of, we don't want those people living next to us comments. It was very shameful. It was awful. And I came away from that going, you know, there's got to be a better way. And so what I did is I set up a series of meetings and used the media to encourage residents that live downtown. And we together created the Downtown Neighborhood Association, it's now the DBNA. At the time it was the DNA. And really said, you know, if you want to know what's going on in your community, if you want to have a say, if you want to participate in how your downtown looks, you need to be at the table. And you need to get engaged. And so with that, the DBNA was created with residents. It was their thing and became very active, which I think was great because then you had all voices at the table, and public outreach should be about all voices. And so that was, in my mind, that was a success story. It started out as a really bad, ugly situation and ended up with a really fun outcome and a good outcome. And they're still very active today. And, you know, it's not just folks that own downtown properties, it's people that are renting, again, because people have different living situations, and I thought that was a good outcome. The other one, this is another really fun one of mine. When I first started with the Downtown Boise Association, I found myself at another city council meeting, and we were on opposite sides of the table from East End Neighborhood Association and North End Neighborhood Association. Oh. And it was awful. And we got done with that meeting, and the board chair at the time was Dave Crick, and he and I looked at each other and went, okay, that was silly. And out of that came what we call the Neighborhood Collaborative. And that was in 2004, and that group still meets once a month, every month, and it has expanded from not just INA, NINA, and Downtown Boise Association. It now encompasses a lot more of the neighborhood associations. It is purely informal. There's no formality to it. It's really about people talking. It's about people coming around the table and sharing what's going on in their neighborhood. Deanna knows us really well because she was at the table, and even after I left the DBA, I'm a recovering meeting alcoholic, and so we still meet because I like to know what's going on. But out of that came a lot of really good information about what was happening in the neighborhoods with each other, and we shared good examples of best practices, and we were able to go back to the city and say, you know, we really would like to see X, Y, Z, insert, you know, in things that really mattered to what was going on at the city and what was impacting the neighborhoods and vice versa. We could also get involved. The city of Boise puts together all the neighborhoods and has an annual meeting. And the first year that happened, we were able to be at the table and help craft that agenda. So I think some really good things came out of that. Brought in speakers, provided some education for some folks of how to do things with regard to the neighborhoods. So that's the Neighborhood Collaborative. I think another great result out of standing at a city council meeting and going, okay, we should have talked months and months ago. Another one, I call this moving towards the nuisance. And in many instances, a lot of folks have purchased a condo or moved into downtown housing, and then suddenly they were like, well, it's noisy. What the heck? And then, you know, my phone would ring and say, what are you going to do about it? And, well, did you notice where you moved into? There's a bar next door to you. And so what we did, we put together a group of downtown residents, downtown business owners, went to the city and said, you know, there's this sound ordinance. It's not comprehensive enough to deal with an urban center. What can we do together to make this work? Again, pulling in people around the table, having a conversation. Now, To date, I don't believe that the sound ordinance has been updated, but I know that there was a lot of work that was done with that. And I also know that Boise Police sat at the table and we crafted some really great ways to figure out how to make it work. One of those was a lot of the food carts would, set up at 11, 12, midnight. And of course, that keeps people on the street late. So we worked with the vendors and said, would it be possible that you're on the opposite side of the street or around the block because you've got somebody who's trying to go to sleep? There are a myriad of things that could be done with that situation. But again, out of a bad situation, getting people around the table and inviting people to come in. The other thing I would say about that is research and education is critical. So understanding the situation instead of just lashing out. I did a ton of research of what other cities like Austin or Nashville, where you've got late night, the round the clock type communities, and that have had a huge influx of residents into an urban center. And so by having that research and that education, you're able to bring people along and say, here are some solutions. Let's work together on this. So education is critical if you're going to be involved, because by the time you get to city council, or by the time you're trying to fight something, it's usually too late. One of my other favorite topics, because it's everybody's favorite topic, is parking. Of course, everybody has something to say about parking. So we, when I was at the DBA, always parking was a big issue. And so what we did is we put together a task force. And so by the time new things were happening at the city, we had educated this group of business owners and others on another way to do this. So again, research and education. I went out and looked at what other cities were doing with regard to parking meters and about different parking zones. And out of that came the electronic meters, which then this task force made a recommendation to the city. And then Craig Croner and group and his team at the city then went and did further research, came back to the same task force. So we had this ongoing public outreach between all these different groups at the same table, educating each other so that we didn't have the naysayers just shouting. We had people that were being educated and then became the ambassadors. So I purposely went and got my loudest, most vocal anti-parking folks, and I put them at the table and I said, let's work at this together. And they are now the biggest ambassadors about those changes that the city has put into place with electronic meters, because now you can add more time. You've got an app that you can use to add more time, and it's a lot more user-friendly and less tickets. So great results from those stories that started out, as I call them, my prickly situations. So I'll leave it at that.
Hi, I'm Ann. I grew up on the edge, on 10 acres, on the edge of a small town in Western Oregon, and was pretty much a free-range kid. So what influenced me really from that was that from a very early age, I could ride my bike anywhere. And I grew up playing in ponds and romping through the woods. So I have an amazing interest in and love of open space. Then, right after college, I found myself in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I didn't much like it, actually. It smelled the steel industry was dying. It smelled really awful about 4 days of the week, and I had migraine headaches. However, again, there was a profound influence on me forever because Pittsburgh has amazing neighborhoods. We lived in a neighborhood called Squirrel Hill, but the north side was Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. And each of the neighborhoods had a very distinct feel. So that, along with reading Jane Jacobs' Death and Life of Great American Cities, gave me, the little country girl, and just a profound appreciation for good urban design. So we moved to Boise. In both of those places, I feel I was engaged in the community in that I shopped and I wandered around and I just was part of the community, but I wasn't a change agent. And I wasn't really when we moved to Boise. We had little kids. So looking on this, I'm thinking, okay, so what did it take for me personally to get engaged in something? And at first I had to find out about it. And that's what Kâren talked about that. Then for me, I had to have a really strong emotional reason. Like, this is going to make a difference to me, one way or the other, what's happening. And then the next thing is, I have to have a way of doing something about it. And then to stay engaged, it has to be fun and meaningful. So, in 1989, the only time in my life I was reading the Statesman legal notices out loud to my husband, who knows why? And I'm not a quick learner because I never did this again. All of a sudden, I realized that this being, here comes, right? They're describing a development that was proposed in the area that Judy Outerkirk and I walked in like 3 or 4 times a week. Okay. It was Halls Gulch, which most people didn't know about. What I learned from our experience, which was, for me it was 4 years, for most everybody else it was 5 years, because my family took a year off and went to Africa, and for a whole year, and absolutely nothing bad happened during that time. What I found from this is we didn't know about it. I mean, you shouldn't have to read the legal notices. So even though, I think even today, and hopefully Boise City is going to tell me that they're doing better at this, I think they are. Even though we have all these tools at our disposal, I still think that it's very hard, even for people who want to be engaged, to know what's going on. And I think it's also hard for us, even if we know what's going on, maybe to draw a connection to our lives, which is what, for me, takes getting me involved. If I don't see a connection to my life, then, you know, it's going on, it's somebody else's problem. So anyway, things that I learned from Halls Gulch, and this was 30 years ago, well, the beginning of it. The deck was stacked against us as residents who, we hardly knew where City Hall was. I didn't know that a city law was called an ordinance, and I didn't know, the number of things I didn't know is incredible. And we were volunteers. We had ordinary lives, and we were doing this after hours. So it was very frustrating for us. There were 303 houses proposed in Halls Gulch. And there was hearing after hearing. And mind you, this is before the internet, so the way that we communicated to people was we paid for our own flyers and we dropped them on people's doorsteps. And it was very frustrating because we were fighting, you know, don't build these houses in Halls Gulch. It was very frustrating because every time we walked into the room, there was a high-powered lawyer who was being paid by the developer, and he hired a former Idaho Supreme Court justice, the best land use lawyer in town, and here we are, little residents who don't know anything. So there's a happy ending to this, right? I mean, instead of 303 houses, there were 31, I think, built, and we had a lot of fun in the process. And we ended up, from being adversarial, here's another thing that I learned, that it is much more satisfying, more meaningful, more fun if you're for something than if you're against something. So over the period of 5 years, we turned this around so that toward the end, Wayne Boo, who was an amazing person who got stuck, he didn't want to be a developer, that we were on the same side. And so he was actually helping us raise the money to buy Halls Gulch. So being for something is a lot easier and a lot more fun. Basically, Halls Gulch propelled me into city council. I mean, we had all these hearings and nothing bad happened, but we figure at some point something bad is going to happen if we don't change the cast of characters, and nobody else was willing to do it. I mean, my 10 favorite people that I thought would be good on city council had good reasons, and I didn't. And so I got elected. I think I give myself probably an A- in being a good organizer, and probably about maybe a C in being an elected official. However, one of the really important things, because it gave me a different perspective, I have a lot more empathy and understanding for elected officials at all levels than I ever did. One of the most important lessons I learned was from Betty Berman Solo, who is still a neighborhood activist in Southwest. she had come with some kind of proposal, and she had talked to me ahead of time, and I voted against it. And she had the courage to call me the next day. This is before the internet, right? And she said, you know, Ann, I don't mind you voting against me, but we worked really hard on this, and I wish that somehow on the record you had acknowledged the points that we made that were good, because that really matters to us. And I've always remembered this, and I heard Norm Rice a couple of years ago at the city conference say basically the same thing. He's the former mayor of Seattle, and that is that elected officials need to listen very carefully, and we need to reflect, they need to reflect back what they've heard. And if they end up making a decision that is contrary to what they heard, they need to give very good reasons why. So this was very important. Fast forward, an issue that I'm involved in now is with the Boise Bike Boulevard Coalition, which is a group of people that I'm just sort of a fellow traveler. I didn't originate this. I would not. I just go along and say, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. Young people who started the idea of we need to have a network to connect the ways of getting around by bicycle all over the county for the, I call it the young, the old, and the timid, because there are a lot of streets that are really easy to bike on, and then all of a sudden you come to this place that is absolutely impossible. So these young people did an amazing job of involving in community engagement. What they did is they got the support of 20 neighborhood associations. I think there's 30-some in the city of Boise. That's pretty amazing. And the more amazing thing is this network was adopted unanimously by the Ada County Highway District commissioners, which doesn't happen very often. So that was great. But what we have now, and thanks to our advocate commissioner here, we have a chance to actually get these funded. And that's the part that is trickier. We had 20 neighborhood associations, and a large number of those testified to get it adopted. At the budget hearing, where we're asking for the money to actually implement it, we've had maybe 7 to 10, and Deanna tells me that's a lot of people. But I grew up in the old days when the old city hall, we could actually fill it, and the capacity was 400, right? We have a long way to go. Boise City, I absolutely am confident, has a good and a better way of engaging the public. ACHD, present company accepted, is not there yet. And so what do we need to do? Hang in there, gather allies, and be sure that it's fun. Thanks. Oh, wait just a minute. I almost forgot. I don't have a PowerPoint. I have a book. This is called For the Love of Cities, and the subtitle is The Love Affair Between People and Their Places, and it's by Peter Kageyama. And his premise is that we really need to love our cities, and we need to talk about it. And I suspect that all of you are here because you do love your city. And so my challenge to all of us is to make Boise not only the most livable city, but the most lovable, that we really look for and celebrate what he calls love notes, the places that we really love. Because I think it's not a bad thing to talk about emotion. I mean, we need to have rules and regulations and be civil. But I think if we share what really brings us joy, what really brings us delight in our community, we'll find that we have a lot more common ground. So, great book. I highly recommend it.
Right. So I gather that we're all here because we have a lot of passion and love for our city, but also concern about the changes that it's going through. And I think it's important that we recognize that and keep that in mind as we talk about what community engagement is, and recognize that, at least as far as the city goes, formally it's been around for approximately 3 years, but it has been going on actually long before that, maybe not as formalized as we understand it right now. But with that, I want to make it clear that this is an ongoing process that's at root in democracy in general, right? We've seen that historically. And I think one thing we need to be very aware of when we talk about it today is the differences that have occurred primarily through those different ways to do outreach and engagement, primarily online in the way that it does allow for things to become maybe hyper vigilized, right, in ways that could be more positive or, as it tends to be, more negative, right? So what I want to do is, on my portion of this, is talk about the ways that community engagement has occurred and the array of community engagement that we do from the city, and kind of explore what that means and look at some examples as a part of that. So, as you're probably likely aware, with most of you in this room, we've done a variety of outreach in the forms of things like community conversations. We've held 4 of those now, the first 3 on growth, the last one most recently on transportation, where some of you were present, as I see. And these were born out of the idea that there is more opportunity to sit down and workshop ideas with our community to have a better understanding of what they think and feel, but also to better understand the values that they associate with the changes that are happening around them and find ways to better address that. And so from community conversations, we are becoming more informed about what policies may work and what proposals we should be pushing forward or shouldn't be. Similarly, we've seen other community engagement in the form of community campaigns where we know that the community is interested in specific issues and wants to see them pushed forward. 2 of the most recent ones that have been quite successful are things like Herbert Pros and the Plastics Challenge. We count that as a part of community engagement because we're hearing from the community that there is a need to address things like climate change or things like how we address recycling and other issues. And so we try to find ways to mirror and match those concerns within our community. Next, of course, we do a lot of digital. We have surveys, we have feedback. I think a good example that we've seen recently, and I know that Jim Hansen here can speak to, the 8th Street bike lane survey we pushed out previously. We sat down with ACHD before and reviewed it with them and talked about our proposal. And then we took that out to the community, and some of you, Deanna Smith and others, were there to provide feedback directly to us, and then also online where we heard a variety of opinions. It's not that it was just all in support, right? But that we also heard that some people would prefer that we focus on other parts of the city as well, right? That we start to expand where some of these projects go, not just in the downtown. And it's not like we forget that just because we're focusing on 8th Street downtown. We're aware of it, but it's also a collaboration that we have to then continue on with ACHD as a part of that. Another thing I'd say about digital initiatives is they often help us get a good pulse, so to speak, for the community around us. And what I mean by that is we hear from a broader amount of people typically than we might from, say, a community conversation. And that allows us to better understand what people know about the issues and where we maybe need to work on educating a little bit further and potentially outreach. Where do we need to go, right? In addition to that, we obviously have newsletters, utility billing inserts. Again, going back to Anne's point that there needs to be other touch points or other ways to encourage engagement and information. And so an example there would be where we are talking more and more about our climate change and our utility billing insert, or most recently, the watershed and the changes that have occurred there and the construction there as well. We've also have our websites related to that to drive traffic and help people understand what they can do to be involved in that process. And then in addition to that, we have a variety of neighborhood meetings, which I know many feel are quite contentious, right? By the time it gets to a neighborhood meeting, some people feel like they can't be involved, right? They expect that there should have been a meeting prior to that, a pre-application meeting, which Josh will speak to a little bit here in a moment, where we're addressing that because we've heard community members' concerns. But in addition to that, community engagement also occurs at the neighborhood planning level. And that's what I mean when I say it's not like it's some brand new thing. This has occurred in Boise and other cities as well through planning, where we have to work with the neighborhood representatives and figure out the action lists, the things that they would like to see happen in their community and the ways that we might be able to make that happen through collaboration with the city, through ACHD and others that support that mission as well. And that is also where Energize Our Neighborhoods comes in. That's another touch point of engagement where we encourage neighborhoods such as the North End, such as Ustick, to start to actualize and activate their neighborhoods in ways to become more empowered and to engage as an arm of themselves for making decisions that will shape their neighborhood. It also includes organizing events that actually help support the long-term lovable nature of the city as well as the livability, like Hyde Park Street Fair most recently, right? Or You Stick and Bloom. So while there's definitely concerns with community engagement, I think the story that we need to be telling and really focusing on with it as a part of the city is that it is an ongoing collaboration for all of us. And it's one of those things where we are all learning the process in a way that allows us to address concerns and respond in a thoughtful manner as we sit down with you and talk about what those issues may be and as we learn what they might be. And I think no other example serves as a really wonderful piece of the good, the bad, and the ugly, so to speak, for our theme than the recent changes to the development code that were brought about by the Developmental Advisory Group that was chaired by Council Member Elaine Clegg. Right? What came of that was that we created approachable public-facing documents that I have here, if you'd like afterwards, but also new procedures for the developmental process itself, for notification mailings, right? And then also for site postings and for testimony and feedback. It was an opening from our community to figure out better ways to talk about how do we address development, how do we address change, and how do we work on this in a way where we are collaborating with you so that it doesn't feel as if there's a lack of transparency, but that there's more opportunities to be involved. And one final thing I'll say on that before Josh gets up here is that we've heard, you know, by the time it gets to a public hearing, it's almost nothing you can do, right? And I'd push back on that just a little bit more in thinking about it further. We have multiple touch points that you can be involved in. And I think one thing is clear to us as we've engaged in community engagement over the many years here, it's that maybe perhaps those processes aren't as clear as they could be. And that should be a call to action for all of us to figure out what ways we can be involved to improve that process, whether that's on the private side, whether that's on the neighborhood side, and or on the city side. And I think you see through some of the work that we've been doing, especially over the last few years, the growth and improvement moving in that direction. Doesn't mean it's perfect, right? Doesn't mean we're getting it 100% right, but it does mean that we are moving in the direction of being responsive and moving in the direction of trying to make sure that as a city, we recognize that there are things that we need to work with the community. And Josh will speak more to the developmental code changes in that. And if you have other questions about other things that we've done, I'm happy to answer them during the Q&A time.
So as Wayne mentioned, we have been taking a lot of steps to implement a lot of these concepts and ideas about being more responsive, more outgoing, more proactive in terms of community outreach. And like Ann mentioned, how do you comment on a development proposal that you don't know about? So we've been looking at our processes. How do we improve this? How do we notify more folks? We did hear a lot of concerns, and those have been growing about transparency of process, increased notification. Those kind of came to a head in the spring of 2018, and the Development Advisory Group was formed to address those directly, make some changes to the way that we, as a city, reach out to the community and notify residents about development proposals that are going through the process. You know, state code, LUPA, the Local Land Use Planning Act, dictates that cities and governments notify citizens of development proposals, and there's kind of the three ways that we do that. We publish in the newspaper, the official newspaper of Boise, the Idaho Statesman. We mail notices to residences within 300 feet, has always been the standard. And then we have postings on the site, and you're probably more than familiar with the little yellow signs that you'll see when the development proposals are submitted to the city. The Development Advisory Group took a step back and really looked at those and decided those weren't enough, that they wanted to see those expanded, opportunities for greater notification, greater citizen awareness, and that's kind of a two-pronged approach. Is that there's the notification once an application or development is submitted, but there's also the outreach that takes place prior to that with the Capitol Terrace apartments. If that group had gone out and had those outreach meetings with the neighborhood and the downtown shareholders. It could have a much different outcome. The conversation could have been different from the beginning. And that takes place in what we call our pre-application meetings and our neighborhood meetings. So an applicant is required to come into the city and hold a pre-application meeting prior to filing an application that goes before the Planning and Zoning Commission and ultimately City Council. A lot of the times they would hold their neighborhood meetings prior to that meeting. They would have a proposal that was fairly well set in stone. They would go to the neighborhood meeting, just kind of check the boxes. Okay, we held our neighborhood meeting. We held our pre-application meeting, and now we're going to submit to the city. Part of this process has been to kind of take a step back and take a more proactive approach on that. Require the pre-application meeting before they hold their neighborhood meeting so that we as city staff can hold those conversations with them about what really is the purpose of the neighborhood meeting, what are the outcomes we're looking for, what's the dialogue we're looking for with the neighborhoods, and the opportunity to kind of improve projects as they work through the process. Then after that pre-application meeting, they can go out and hold that neighborhood meeting. And we can require a second neighborhood meeting if subsequent changes to the proposal are made, which are different than the folks saw at the neighborhood meeting. So that's been, I think, a well-received step forward. Kind of taking a step back, these will all take effect in calendar year 2020. So any application submitted after January 1st, 2020 will follow these new rules. The second part of this, the noticing that I spoke about before, we've increased radius of mailings for high-profile projects that have potential for impacts on a larger area of the city. So things like rezones, comprehensive plan amendments, large subdivisions of over 5 acres, conditional use permits greater than an acre, and plan unit developments greater than an acre will go to 500-foot mailing notice. Granted, that's not the city, but there are, there are things to consider in terms of resources, just mailing costs. We have a single GIS technician who's charged with sending out mailings for every application that's submitted throughout the city. Certainly this is going to continue to evolve. 500 feet may not be the ultimate goal, but it's a step in the right direction, we feel like. Site postings have also been dramatically revamped. If you've seen City of Eagle or City of Meridian, a lot of times you'll see the big white wood signs for large developments. So those same types of developments that get the larger mailing radius also have to provide a 4-foot by 4-foot wood sign at the applicant's cost, and the applicant installs them for those to provide a greater notice than the small paper signs would. We do still have the 11 by 17 paper signs on smaller, less impactful applications that are more on a neighborhood level, but the applicant again will post those, provide notarized proof to us that they did post those within the timelines. And we've also created a document, and you probably won't be able to see it real great on this next slide, but in the upper right, we do have standards and guidelines about where those are placed, how many of them go on a site. Sites with greater than 1,000 feet of frontage are required to provide 2 signs. They must be in the front yard, and they must be perpendicular to the street. We had heard some feedback that when they're parallel to the street, they're easy to miss. You're looking at the side of a very narrow posting, and those can be missed more easily. So really refining those standards about how sites are posted and how the public is notified. I'd like to say that we are doing better. I think we are, and we're going to continue to evolve. The technology and the internet is a whole new frontier in terms of noticing public hearings. There was a bill that went through the state legislature last year that would have shifted noticing from newspapers to online. That didn't make it through, but it's probably going to come up again. It's a new world. Newspapers are certainly less impactful than they used to be. I think there's an opportunity for both worlds. Certainly we want to continue to live in the newspaper world, but also embrace the digital age, some of the things that community engagement is doing, moving us in that direction. The really user-friendly neighborhood pamphlets, the city planning handbook that really talks through our process in ways that people can understand, because I'll be the first to admit it's a complicated world to the average citizen. It's difficult to understand. how do these things work? And we're really, I think, making great strides in helping to explain that, get that information out there, and ultimately be as transparent as we can. So I'd love to talk some more about it during Q&A, so thank you.
Okay, thank you, panelists. The panel, because we know this has been such a hot topic of late, and is always a challenging one, they had chosen to keep their presentation short and spend more time with the audience doing question and answer. So I hope some of you brought, or they gave you some food for thought to have a question. While you're thinking about that and taking a little time, I wanted to make a couple of comments, and then I have a question I'm going to lead off with, and maybe that will help get it started. I heard a few things that didn't quite get carried very far, and I just wanted to, this is a deep and close topic for us at Idaho Smart Growth and smart growth in general. One of the principles, one of the 10 principles of smart growth is good collaboration, engagement, and partnerships. Because what we know and what anyone can observe if you really look out there, that process always results in better outcomes. The larger perspective that you can bring to a solution, it just always ends up being better. The other thing that good engagement that we experience creates and produces, and I think some of the stories you heard tonight spoke to this, is it creates buy-in. If people can see their voice, see their thoughts, see their idea, even if it couldn't be incorporated for real reasons, they feel heard. And at the end of the day, they feel like they own a little bit of that outcome. And when people feel an ownership, they care about it. I think Anne's story about Hull's Gulch is a wonderful one, and one that we all know now as a community has been a real gift to our community. But through that process, one of the things I saw that happened were people like Anne and others getting involved kind of for the first time about something they really were passionate about, slowly getting to the point where they were given an opportunity to help create this. And so when they got to the point of, we can buy the land, that took a while to even get to that decision for people who don't know, quite a bit of effort to get to that point. People were ready to buy the land. I mean, people were already invested, they cared about it, they understood it, and not that it was easy to raise that money, but it was possible to raise that money. So I think that's a good example of investment and how good engagement can create that public buy-in and have people feel like it's part of their community. And one other thing I just wanted to talk about, I didn't hear anyone say this, but engagement really starts with you. I've learned this the hard way. We want others to engage us. We want to make sure we know about the notices, we know about things, and that can always get better and it can be improved. But at the end of the day, you have to decide you want to be engaged, you have to be paying attention, you have to get involved in something. And one of the things I would encourage you to know, if you don't, your neighborhood associations, and if you live in the city of Boise, you live in one, whether you're aware of it or not. And in addition to the notices, the 300 or 500 foot notices, neighborhood associations also get noticed for anything that is inside their neighborhood and or something that's large that's adjacent to their neighborhood. So if you plug into your neighborhood association, you're going to also, it's another way to know what's going on. So I just wanted to let people know that engagement starts with you and encourage people to think about that. And with that, I'm going to ask Kâren a question because she didn't really touch on this. We invited her to the panel partly because she's from the private sector. So I'm going to ask you what you consider to be the developer's role in good engagement and what we, meaning the public, can do to help them use best practices.
Thanks for putting me on the spot. I would say the developer is part of the community. So I think that it goes both ways. I think our development community has become very educated on how to reach out and engage the community, because there have been some very high profile projects that went south because they did not. And so I think at the end of the day, a lot of the development community really cares, because it is also their community. It also costs them a lot of money if they have to delay the project, and nobody wants to be in a really bad situation. So one of the things I would say about the development community is that with the tools that the city's put in place, and with the opportunity now with all the tools that are at their disposal, there is a way to get out there and really communicate with the community. I mentioned who I work for. We mostly work with municipalities and cities, but we also work with some private companies that, when they have a big impactful program, they are more apt now to hire professionals that do this public outreach for them. There are a number of companies that do this and do it really well. I've seen it from, small developments to big mining to power projects. Some of the big companies even have public involvement and strategic communication folks on staff, because it is more and more necessary for people to feel like they're heard, and they want those people on their side, that they don't want to have a big war.
So, questions from the audience?
That's a bit of a follow-up, I think, about the developer community. So sometimes you have the developer, you have the city or jurisdiction, and then you have the public, you have the neighborhoods. And somewhat because of the way the decision-making process happens at the city, is my understanding the city sometimes can't do certain kinds of things to facilitate between these two parties. Is that true?
I'm going to defer that to the city folks.
So as long as the developer is willing to reach out to the neighborhood and meet with them, there's not a limit really to what they can get done. I mean, they can have multiple meetings before the application is submitted. They can have meetings during the process. Where we run into trouble is when electeds or boards start having outside meetings. You run into obviously public meeting law issues. But the developer, if he's, and you can see projects that go well where the developer did this, is that they're out there early, they're out there talking to the neighborhood about what they're looking for, and they end up with an easier process, and I would definitely say a better product in the end too.
I'm going to add a little something to that. So the collaborative visioning group that Kâren talked about, that's actually a real sticky point for me, because the good developers do good engagement and outreach. There's some who don't. Some of them actually are afraid to do it. So that's something maybe we should look at ourselves to see if we can fix. But I do believe personally that the city should take a stronger role in facilitating. I recognize that electeds and others cannot, but our city currently has a position that staff cannot do that and should not do that. And I think it's unfortunate personally.
Can I do a follow-up on that then? Because I think that is my question. Because unfortunately, especially if you have some neighborhoods that maybe almost are like get caught, okay, they get this notice, it's the first time they've heard about it, they come to the meeting, and the developer is presenting it as a, here's our plan, what kind of fence do you want? As opposed to really and truly in terms of doing engagement. And I know that that's sort of the developer's challenge, that if they could do a better job of it, but oftentimes it puts the neighborhoods in this situation like we don't feel like we have any choices, perhaps, or sort of this is the way it is, and sometimes I think having a city as the facilitator or having them at the table as well could actually be a much more meaningful conversation, because in some cases, an application may follow code, city code, to the absolute letter, but most times they don't. It requires some sort of a PUD or, you know, something else. And so what are the things that, you know, neighbors don't necessarily know the things that we can actually negotiate really well. Most times we're negotiating, it's gonna cause traffic problems, and it's gonna overflow our schools, and it's gonna do all these things, and that, you know, then you have the city that's saying, well, you know, we take those things into consideration, but, you know, so it's like, what can we negotiate? We can negotiate for better setbacks, we can negotiate for better landscaping, we can negotiate, sometimes maybe we have to really go to bat for better density. I mean, that's the challenge, is that I think neighborhoods oftentimes end up in a disadvantage. And then what happens is we end up with what you said, Kâren, is finally we end up at the city council or, you know, in planning, where we're you know, then you have the neighborhoods against development, when there really could have been better conversation coming into that, and having the city as a part of that conversation is helpful, because I believe particularly when neighborhoods get caught flat-footed, they don't know how to deal with it. And I'm not in Boise, I'm in Garden City, so we're in a little bit of different situation, but I think different jurisdictions, particularly around the valley, could be in similar situations.
I agree totally. And I do believe now, even though you're in Garden City, you now have met these two guys, right? And I think that it's important for us. Honestly, I didn't know. I'm on the North End Neighborhood Association board, and I go to most of the meetings, and I didn't even know that there was this, you know, Department of Public Engagement, right? And so now that we know, I think we can be, and if Garden City, if Boise has more than that, let's figure out how Boise's doing it and get them to do it better. And you all can be asking us what we really need, right? And then you can be taking it to Garden City, and certainly ACHD could learn a lot from what Boise's doing already. So I think it's up to all of us to be saying, okay, here's what we really need. Because I agree with you totally. That's what I meant by the imbalance, right? We're all volunteers. The developer's getting paid, right? I mean, this is money. It's not an equal playing field. We aren't equal partners yet, and Boise is working on that, but we're still not equal partners, and it's up to us to figure out how to move that more forward.
I want to speak real quickly. What is your name?
My name is Wendy Carver Herbert.
Wendy. Yeah, so that's what you brought up and what Deanna just brought up, Wendy, is something we heard at the Developmental Advisory Group repeatedly, right? It's why is the city not present at some of these neighborhood meetings that are occurring? And one of the things that is very real with relation to that is that it's about resources, time, right? And when Ann is talking about us all being volunteers, one of the things that we're confronting as a city as we grow too is where are our resources allocated? And so with working with the Developmental Advisory Group, we wanted to figure out ways to allow the community to have better understanding on what they could negotiate as a part of that, whether that's at the neighborhood meeting, whether that's at Planning and Zoning Commission, Design Review, or the Historic Preservation Commissions, right? And from that, those documents that you see up there really do spell out a lot of that. They break it down into a more simplified language, and they're all available online on our website, and we hand them out to developers during the pre-application meeting and tell them they are the best practices and they absolutely should follow them. But more to the point, with the passage of the site posting and notification procedures that will go into effect in January 2020, they will be further informed of those processes, and there will be more touch points for you to be involved. So one of the items that is on here at the bottom right here, this proposed development project feedback, this is a result of our engagement during the Developmental Advisory Group to allow you, even if you couldn't be present at that neighborhood meeting for that, to provide feedback on the proposal when you get that notice in the mail saying, hey, there's a pre-application meeting, which is a change from our current plan. So we're hearing you, and we're trying to find ways to navigate that with the limited resources that we do have, and we are working on it, right? And that's the thing that I think is promising in all of this. It's not that it's hopeless, but actually there is a lot of opportunity to figure out what that looks like, how can it work, and what does our city start to look like through that ongoing engagement, through you, through us, and through private developers a lot to the point that Deanna's saying. It starts with you, right? And we recognize that, and we're working on it, and we hope to see more of that. And I do think that's where we ask that, you and maybe 10 other people that you want to bring with you show up to the community conversations, share with us, because if it's just the same people showing up at these sort of things, we're not getting the kind of feedback we need to improve things. So it requires all of us working together. It can't just be all on the city too. It does require you to be there. And so with things that are about to go forward in the city, like the zoning ordinance update or anything like big like the census, right? We ask that you also be involved with that sort of stuff too, because it has to be that kind of collaboration in order for us to get it right.
So I'm going to call on, you've had your hand up for a while.
Well, I was just trying to sort of back up her comments about the neighborhood being approached by the developer for the meeting. And my experience has been, in some regards, the developers are pretty slick. They know what they're doing, and they have, in some cases, hired professionals to come in and facilitate that whole thing. And they're very good at saying, well, if you don't approve our plan, we can always do this. And they like to kind of push that way. And if you, as a neighborhood representative, are unstable, don't know don't know how to talk back to that, it can be very intimidating. And also, there's always a feeling, I like this idea of the little feedback sheet, but I also wonder what kind of feedback actually goes back to the city after one of those neighborhood meetings, because they are not recording citizen comments. They're there to address them and kind of calm feathers. But do our concerns actually go anywhere beyond the developer at that initial meeting?
I think Kâren wants to respond to that.
I'm going to put this in perspective of some of the big projects that we work on that are mostly transportation, so a little bit different. We record everything. We then give that back to the client so they can see those comments. One of the very nice things about the digital age and capturing information on surveys is that you have that information in real time. So you can really categorize it, see it, and it goes back to the client to be able to work through those issues and hear them. In many instances, in a lot of cases where there's big master planning and some of these other projects, they do what they call charrettes, where they bring the public in, and the end result is a collection of all of the input. So they don't start with the end in mind. They gather all the information and put that together. So I think there's a lot of really good work that's happening with that. Instead of saying, here's the design, now we're going to implement it, it's flip-flopped.
That works.
And I think
yeah.
really good developers or cities that are doing urban planning or master planning are really using that and using it well. I also want to comment on the neighborhood associations. Neighborhood associations are all volunteer. And one of the things that we've done in the past, Deanna, myself, and others, is really work with the city on education so they understand the process. So when you have the call out for somebody to serve on a neighborhood association board, or the folks that are stepping up to volunteer, help them along and reach out to the city for that education, because if they're educated and that notice comes through, they then have the ability to communicate. The biggest challenge with neighborhood associations, I live in Southeast Boise, the neighborhood association is large. It is so huge, so there is that lack of communication. I don't know if they even have meetings because it's so disconnected. But I mean, that's it, and I'm an involved person, and I don't get notices, I don't know. So communication is a challenge for the neighborhood association. So you get a really small group that's in the know. And this is, I think, where the city can really help, is how do you get it further than the, X number of email addresses that they might have, or understanding where those postings are. So that's been a continuous challenge that we heard from neighborhood associations, and I know that the city grapples with that as well. How do you get it further than just the person who's the volunteer person at that neighborhood association who is busy with their day job? They get home and there's 300 emails because somebody's got an issue. So
Tracking back to your original question, I think the one thing I'll add is that developers ignore neighborhood feedback at their own peril, because they're going to get in front of P&Z and city council, and there's going to be 10 or 20 neighbors there that say, we raised these concerns at the neighborhood meeting, the plan didn't change one bit, and city council and P&Z is going to hold them accountable and say, why did you not listen? It's going to delay them, it's going to cost them more money. Time is money in the development world, and they don't want to be deferred 2 months to address those concerns that they should have initially. Granted, every developer isn't going to be smart enough or savvy enough to take that approach or responsible enough, but like I said, ignore the neighborhood at your own peril, because it's going to cost you in the end.
If you're a small neighborhood, which is quite contrary to the CENA, if you're a small neighborhood with 900 homes and fairly new in the ballgame, it's hard to get 10 people to go to a hearing. It's really hard. It's hard to get people to even show up to a neighborhood meeting with the developer. So you have maybe 2 or 3 neighbors, and the developer kind of goes, oh, we can roll right over this. And
I think that's what Ann was talking about, is that unless it's something that you're passionate about, somebody else is going to go.
Right, and that is happens. It's classic. It happens all the time. It's a few core people, and people think they don't need to go because and then at the end of the day, when you're the one of 3 people sitting in a public meeting, then your decision makers kind of say, well, it must not be that important.
So I was going to add a couple of comments to the question that you raised about, how do we know they're being taken back? I never leave it up to the developer to take anything back. So it's important for citizens to know you have the same rights. And in the city of Boise, and I don't want to keep this completely Boise-centric because we have non-Boise residents attending, but really any city, there is a staff person assigned to every project. In the small cities, it's probably always the same staff person because some cities don't have a lot of staff. And so you have every right to contact that staff person. It doesn't matter what city it's with. It doesn't matter if it's with Ada County Highway District or some other highway district. There's always a project manager or a staff review person assigned, and they're a public servant. And so I encourage people, if you come out of a development meeting and you're frustrated or you don't feel heard, there's 3 things I always do. If I'm in that meeting and I feel frustrated, I try and stop it right there. I try and really communicate with the developer or their representative and say, this really feels like it's way too far down the track for us. Can we ask you to pull this back a little bit and work with us on this a little bit? Because this isn't ready, and I guarantee if you just take this forward, we're just going to be knocking heads in front of P&Z and City Council or whichever commission they're going before. Some developers will respond to that, but it's about asking them in that kind of way. It's a reasonable request, but asking it reasonably. We want to work with you on this. We have some thoughts and ideas, but it's not about what height the fence is or what color the houses are. We've got bigger issues we want to resolve, and then we can support you. And that's something that is very valuable to the development sector. If you can say, hey, we've got some concerns, but if we can fix them, we'll support you. We'll stand up in front of whoever and say, hey, yeah, this developer came, worked with us, and we're on board. To Kâren's comment, they hate those delays. So would they rather take an early delay of maybe a month or 2 to spend a little more time with you? And it will also then give you a sense, is this a developer who wants to work with us or not? If they kind of say, we don't really care, so that's when you might want to go talk to the staff and let the staff know. We tried to meet with this person, we have these concerns, here's what they are. And then a third thing, Kâren talked about their practice is to record them. You can record the meeting. It's your meeting as much as it's theirs. I mean, I would probably not do it secretively. I would probably say to whoever's presenting, do you mind, we're going to record this meeting. Most of us have one of these now. Most of them have good recording devices on them. And then you can have, in case you're concerned you might get misrepresented. So that's a tool, and to think smart about, what are my tools and what's available to me, and use your city staff or your ACHD staff, or I use staff a lot. They all know me personally, not so much at the city anymore because I don't do as much work there, but so other questions?
I have a story, a happy ending story on the engagement. This was an ACHD neighborhood meeting, and I don't know whether ACHD requires it, but anyway, it was a developer who wanted to vacate a right-of-way that the neighbors didn't want to be vacated. They had a neighborhood meeting, and we had 52 people come, and it was quite contentious. And I went away going, I don't see any way that we're going to resolve this. I think we're going to lose. But there was at least one neighbor who had been talking to the developer's representative ahead of time and continued that conversation. And the result was that on September 18th, the right-of-way was vacated, a 20-foot pathway was left as a public park, and it was a win-win-win. And this was because one neighbor in particular, and he'd gotten a petition with like 500 signatures, but one neighbor built a relationship with the developer's representative. ACHD staff was willing to go along. Everybody was willing to just pay attention and work on it. And instead of having a big fight, we had a kumbaya moment, and apparently it just went right through.
Well, there was a lot more work to that. I have a couple of questions.
Good. I was going to ask if.
Well, the one of the things I really appreciated Ann about is, and I don't necessarily abide by the rule that don't talk to elected officials because they have to sit in judgment. Ann and I had a conversation about what ACHD could or couldn't do, and there are very few tools in ACHD's toolbox. The tools are over in the city, the general purpose government. They have much, much broader set of opportunities, but they have to know, and they have to know what to ask for. And so, Ann understanding the difference between what to ask for, because the most frustrating thing in the highway district is there's a lot of people who come in and ask for things we can't give them at all. And then they go to the city, and the city says, well, that's technically a traffic issue, but the city isn't asking ACHD to make a decision about or to impose certain traffic-related conditions, because they think, well, that's ACHD's job. So that's one of the things you have to really drill down and say, no, the city can ask for all kinds of things related to traffic and then enter into an agreement. The thing I want to do, a couple of shout outs. One is I think Boise's energized neighborhood process has been terrific. Has really literally energized some neighborhoods. The charrette model that you mentioned is really good because that's before people have come up with designs, or if they've come up with designs, they totally understand they may be thrown out, because the worst thing is, and this assumption that's made by most of us is, the insiders get together, they come up with a design, and really it's about persuading people, and they're going to spend all their money persuading the neighbors and try and pick off some advocates and then divide and conquer, and we'll get that done. The energized process indicated there's a lot of people, nobody knows a neighborhood better than those people in that neighborhood. And they're like, rather than wait until somebody finally buys that piece of property and develops it, and then we have to react to what they want to develop it on, we can tell you right now, we wish that this area would develop in this way, and this area would develop in this way, and this area would develop in this way. And they're not all wanting parks, They're reasonable. People aren't going to say, turn every empty lot or rundown building into a park. But there's this sort of like, well, we got to wait. And so between it's almost like energized and has surfaced this sort of empowerment in the neighborhood to say, we would actually like to engage in a public process to say, can we do something about this area in our neighborhood? Rather than wait for somebody, we could probably find out who owns it, but rather than wait for somebody to buy it or the current owners to make a decision and go through all this process, because there's no obligation for them to come to us as they're going through that process. The flip side is having talked to some people who own property, and they're like, I just as soon it be this little funky retail space, or because for me to invest in the time and energy it's just too much, and there's too much complexities, and besides they're all NIMBYs and they'll tell me no, so I got other fish to fry. So there's both expectations on both sides, and so the neighbors are like, well, I guess we just have to wait.
And can I share?
What can we do?
Well, can I share a really good ACHD story about Kootenai?
Yeah.
And so HDR worked with ACHD, and there were some original plans for traffic calming through Kootenai, and quickly realized that the community wanted something different. And kudos to ACHD, they went and knocked on doors and got people to the community meetings, and the end result has been fabulous with these design. Made accommodations for bike paths and better safety, traffic calming, but also keeping the traffic moving, just really getting people. So that model exists and exists really well. And the ACHD staff, the public outreach folks, and then we partnered with ACHD, and it really is a model that works really, really well. But it takes that effort to go and knock on doors, and that's not always possible. And I want to reiterate again, it's also up to us to be educated. I'm kicking myself right now. I got one of those little wonderful postcards from the city about a park that's being developed in my neighborhood. I'm all for parks, but they gave me 3 choices, pick 1, 2, or 3, and I'm like, well, what happened to inviting me beforehand? What if I don't like 1, 2, or 3?
Yeah.
And I'm engaged. I watch what's going on. And so I think we all get it, and it's a matter of pay attention and really educate yourself.
I just wanted to jump back to something that you said with Energize, and kind of relates to the example that I think Kâren has shared. When we slow down and do some of that, like we did in the West Downtown with the PC rezone, where we talked to the neighbors, we did a couple of open houses, we see that overwhelming collaboration and approval that comes from that. And so that recently went to planning and zoning, and it's going up to city council soon. And I think, there is a push for more of that. It's not lost on the ears of people at the city. And of course, certainly within planning, we are trying to address all of that. And I think Energize is, one arm of that. It's not like a multi-arm monster here, but like one arm of that, right? Current planning is another arm of that. Comprehensive planning is another arm of that. Community engagement. We're trying to address it in multiple ways, but obviously, that's where that leveling comes in, where you all have to step up and be involved as you can be too, because at the end of the day, it requires all of us coming together for that sort of stuff. And we can go forward with proposals, but the other thing to remember too is it doesn't mean that they're always set in stone either. So through that collaboration, through that engagement, we learn how best to tailor some of those things. And I think some previous examples, like with ADUs, the ADU ordinance that was recently passed is an example of that too, where we talked about it at community conversations, initially heard a little concern about what that might mean for different neighborhoods. We did a survey, followed it up, heard more, and from that, we revised the proposal into what it eventually became as an approved ordinance, where the community overwhelmingly approved it. There was no contestation at the final city council hearing. So again, be involved, as Kâren has said, as Anna said, pay attention, but don't be afraid to reach out to the city too. I mean, there are plenty of city staff. In fact, all of the documents up here at certain parts of them, they say contact your planning staff member, or even contact community engagement. We are happy to help direct it where it needs to go. We're happy to help tell you what we can about those projects, where the developments are going. And more to the point, we're trying to be more proactive about that too. And one of the other things I want to point out right smack dab in the middle there is a parcel report. So to Jim's previous comment, one of the things that is going to be happening starting in January 2020 as well is that developers will be printing out this parcel report, bringing it with them, and it explains what zone they are in And from that, you'll have a better understanding of what could be allowed in that zone as well. So it encourages you to then be more proactive and involved and help shape what happens. And to Wendy's point, I get it. It's hard because it seems like, oh, they might already have plans in mind. But you have a lot of power in your voice too, and you can push back, as Deanna is saying, and you have multiple places to share those thoughts too. You can email the staff if the meeting doesn't go well. You can email even community engagement. I mean, with the short-term rental stuff, we got a couple emails on that. So there's a variety of touch points. It doesn't mean that just because you have this one meeting, it's suddenly foreclosed. It is ongoing. Engagement is never a one-off event. It's an ongoing process that we engage in as we collaborate with each other from a moment to the next.
Couple more.
Well, one caveat to the Kootenai project, I saw a presentation on that just recently, and it was cool to see the neighborhood understand how they use their public space, because they had a roadway with parking on both sides, and the HDR came in and said, well, or maybe it was ACHE, they came in and said, well, we can remove one side and have parking on just one side, and you'll have a pathway as well. And the neighbors were just like, no, we don't want to lose parking. So then they came back and they actually went out and did site visits and understood how much parking was actually used, relayed it to the neighborhood, and then the neighborhood knew that they didn't really use that much parking. And so they knew how they use their public space. And that is something that is part of education, like you're talking about. So I do have a question on top of that.
Let me I want to add one thing to the Kootenai thing, because the missing element is there was an amazing neighborhood volunteer who really started that in and for her neighborhood. And by the time ACHD came and HDR came as their consultant, the neighborhood was very prepared and ready. So that I like that story because it took all three entities for an incredibly successful outcome. By the way, that project is getting one of our Grow Smart Awards this year, which I'm very excited about.
That neighborhood knew what to ask for. And there's a lot of neighborhoods that don't know what to ask for. So though it's almost like, and I asked them at the hearing, I said, would you go to, and I listed a couple of other neighborhoods and work with them so they can ask for bulb outs and, you know, the kind of features in the public space. They can do a data analysis of who's parking and who's not so that they can get that. It's like, we just need to clone Ann and a number of volunteers to go into those neighborhoods, because if they don't know to ask for it, they don't necessarily get it. It's not on, by the time it comes to the commission or the city council, it's way too late, and the commission asks, why didn't you ask for these? I didn't know I could. I thought speed bumps and stop signs were all I could ask for.
Okay, you had a separate question.
Well, just, yeah, one question. It was on the new code. And so the development code is based off of like a geography of 300 feet under 5 acre development, and then 500 feet beyond that. In developing this and researching other codes, probably, was there any attempt to incorporate transportation into that? Because if some of these developments are along public transportation routes, I could see where some of those people using those routes might be interested in knowing what is going on in a development next to their route, because that could impact their public transportation. And then it would also provide a voice or an opportunity to have a voice for low income and minority people as well. Did you guys see anything like that at all?
Unfortunately, I was not part of the development advisory group. The staff member who wasn't able to be here tonight. I don't know if those conversations have been had. I know that we are always looking at kind of different ways, you know, with the kind of evolving technology. Yes, community engagement certainly embraces all of those to try and get the message out there. I don't know if, you know, some kind of messaging on the bus system or that was considered.
It'd be a good spot for it, it seems like.
Well, excellent question there. I think we didn't really hear as much about it in terms of public transit being impacted as a part of that. It was more, the group consisted of neighborhood leadership, concerned citizens, and developers, as well as city staff. And from that, most of the concerns that were expressed were related to new proposed developments affecting the neighborhood character, and then also affecting things like parking, and then also historic preservation, buildings, facades, et cetera, right? And so transportation, it's not that it wasn't addressed so much, but that we started to hear that more coming out of things like community conversations. And from that, we moved forward with Keep Boise Moving, which is the city's transportation strategy, to look into ways that that might be impacted. In fact, the whole point of Keep Boise Moving is really to assess, especially around activity centers, where transportation may be impacted and how it could actually be further incentivized through mixed use, mixed income developments that could occur with the support of the neighborhoods. And I think a fine example of that we see moving forward with the involvement of the neighborhood association is on the central bench at Franklin and Orchard. The development that's about to happen there so closely involves the developer. We'll have GGLO there to do some SketchUps to help show what the city is thinking there, but also get feedback with a charrettes, a series of charrettes with the neighborhood to better understand what they would like to see there. And that example there, Franklin and Orchard, also serves for what the city hopes to see around the city as well, around other activity centers. That is but one of many that we hope. So yeah, it didn't necessarily come up at the developmental advisory group, but it's certainly like we didn't miss it. We've heard it, and we definitely want to make sure we're addressing it. And hopefully from that too, collaborate more with ACHD on that. I mean, and of course VRT, we work with them obviously quite a lot, but really make sure that we're finding ways to make some more inroads on that to improve the connections between one activity center to the next, and to make sure people have other ways of getting around the city. That's the whole point of Keep Boise Moving, is to find alternative modes and encourage that and change behavior in that direction.
So that's interesting, because I had a similar question I was going to use if the room got quiet. So I'm going to follow up with this, because it is one thing I didn't hear you say, Josh. It's one thing about neighborhoods, even 500 feet, but what we know today is a lot of these larger developments, they're regional in effect and impact. And it's not just the neighborhood, but it's 10 neighborhoods that care about it. So I have a question very specific. I like the large signs and that you're going to be looking at using them, but what I wanted to ask you is, does the city have the ability to request the developer not just post them on the site, because it may be a site I never go to. It may not be a site that's in my world, daily, monthly travels, but it's going to impact me. Have you given thought to posting those along major corridors or other places, per your question about who else is it going to impact? So if not, I would encourage the city to look at one more red flag. You have the red flag for the 300 to the 500, and one more that says, how regional is this? What area does this really impact? And maybe we need a sign or two, a big sign or two, out on Vista or out on Orchard or out on State Street or Hill Road or whichever, so that those people who are moving through there but may never go to the site, meaning they'll never see the sign, can hear about it.
Go ahead.
No,
But, go ahead.
that specific conversation has not happened about, posting sites, say if a site is back off of Corey or Mitchell, placing it one out on Fairview, for instance, where more people would see it. But what I will say is that things like the new zoning ordinance that we're just starting to develop, you will see a much broader messaging on that, in terms of print ads, radio, television. You'll start to, and strong internet presence. So certainly those community-wide projects like that, we'll see that level of outreach. But having a developer post a site, a road that isn't adjacent to a property, I haven't had those conversations.
Yeah, real quickly, one thing I would add to that is, so the larger signs, the smaller signs, I think you make a great point, Deanna. Part of that, through the new process from the developmental advisory group, is that that one on the top right, as you see there, kind of directs them where to post them on site. We can encourage them to do more, and that's what we try to do with our best practices when we meet with them in the pre-application meetings that we have with them. But we also ask the neighborhood president or whoever they have for the development notice to make sure that they share the messaging on that as well. So I agree that the city can look into doing more of that, and I think the point is well heard on that, but I do think we also need to see the neighborhood push on that and say that it doesn't just go out digitally on your Facebook page or your Twitter or whatever it might be, and not just at your neighborhood meeting, because of course that's limited, but I do think to the point that we've heard here before from Kâren and Ann, that maybe the neighborhood does need to do a little door-to-door too on some of that stuff as well, if it is significant enough. And actually, that did recently happen with the development that was previously proposed at Hillside Hollows with the neighborhood there. When the neighborhood takes action in that way, we see people show up at planning and zoning and voices are heard, and then we see that it matters, and decisions that may have been thought to be set in stone suddenly aren't, right? So again, you know, it's about that partnership, and I think that's the key thing to maybe take away from this is it does start with you. You know, we continue the conversation. Engagement is not a one-off event, and we keep moving forward with that.
I'd just like to second what Deanna said. Being in the North End, there's a limited amount of development that actually can occur there, but we are profoundly affected by development in Eagle and in the foothills. And indeed, I never go where that big sign might be posted. So it'd be good, and maybe work with ACHD, because I realize we as the residents of Boise are caught between this dual jurisdiction. You all know that, right? I mean, it's challenging.
Try to be in Garden City and be caught between all of them.
Exactly. That'd be even worse. So, and while I've got the mic, I would be remiss in not reminding you, not that I need to remind you, but to remind your neighbors, elections are coming up. This is very important. Pay attention. Go to the forums. Read the information. There are so many people running for office in Boise. Try to figure this one out. Ask them questions. And once they get elected, do not be shy to call them and talk to them, right? I mean, seriously, they work for us. So, you know, don't just talk to staff. Talk to your elected officials.
So I'm going to follow suit with Sarah. She likes to end at 7:30. We're at 7:31 and honor people's time, which is not to say people can't stick around. And we have one more question that I'll invite as soon as I'm done. I want to say real quickly to those of you who may be watching remotely, I apologize. I'm not Sarah, so I don't know how to invite you into the conversation. And I wasn't given those instructions. So I hope if you had questions out there, you could send them to us, and maybe we'll send them out to folks, and we can start an online conversation that can continue some of that. Real quickly, I just want to remind people of our last and final one for this year. It's Where Do I Start? Step-by-step guide to taking action. This will be the first Wednesday in November, and that's the 6th. So it's a follow-up to this. It's really kind of moving on to how do I get started? What do I really need to do to dig in? So I'm looking forward to that. Encourage everyone to try and attend that if you can. And just remind everyone, our Citizens Planning Academy is one of our non-funded programs, meaning there's no grant or other entity out there, and we rely on the support of generous people such as yourself to support us. So if that's something you haven't done and you're interested in doing, we would appreciate it, and you can do that online at our website. And with that, I'll let anyone leave who wants to leave and invite Sharon to ask her question.
So it was building on the Franklin Orchard development. I was thinking about how you said that you want more of those around the city. And so if we can weigh in on that one first and offer cool ideas that then could be replicated. And so other neighborhoods could point to them and say, remember that feature that they included? We would like that as well. So that's another reason why people may not go there, but they could use it as a model. Or people who want to live there and don't yet might want to weigh in. And then I was wondering if you could tell us the name of the book again? Yes.
Well, while she's doing that, for the love of cities, I'm going to echo what she said. We actually brought Peter here, gosh, Dana, was that about 5+ years ago for a State of the Downtown? He is fabulous, and he's since written a couple other books. So I'm going to echo what you said. Peter Kageyama, the love of cities.
And you're welcome to take a picture of it, if you want. It's an easy read. It's a fun, I gave it to my daughter for Christmas and she read it on Christmas Day, so.
Sharon, I just wanted to thank you for that comment too. I think, that's part of what we're planning to do as we go forward with the new zoning ordinance as well. And I'm not sure what you've seen online about it or what you've heard at this point, but really Franklin and Orchard serves as a microcosm, a small example of the larger thing we'd like to see moving forward. And so to your point, we will be doing a lot more outreach in that sort of way in terms of how we look at these activity centers across the city, ones that even are already developed out, plus ones that there's a lot more potential to get the neighborhood feedback and really try to better understand and really create these spaces that people want to live or could potentially live, as well as they want to visit, right? Because that's the whole point. Otherwise, and it takes into account transportation as well, because otherwise then we're not helping improve the city in the long term, right? And we're not helping make connections between where people may be and where they might eventually be, because obviously change is inevitable, but we need to figure out how we manage it. And that, again, requires that collaboration. So that's supposed to kick off here sometime within the next couple of weeks with the neighborhood, in particular, the Neighborhood Association. And I do believe there's an extra period for additional feedback on that as it moves forward. Because it's city owned and it's a part of our land trust to sort of figure out what would be there in terms of what the neighborhood, the central bench particularly wants, but then also how does that align with Keep Boise Moving, Grow Our Housing, and that's where it gets to that citywide level as well.
So thank you everyone for coming. Remember, beyond the Citizens Planning Academy, we're a resource. I deal with people from all over the state who call me on a regular basis. So if you have a question and you don't know who to ask, call me. If I can't answer it, I'll find someone who can. Thanks.